Hello and welcome to TempWorks Training. In this section, we will introduce HRCenter and the applicant process in Enterprise. This training will cover all questions posed within the related quiz. Please take the quiz immediately after the training. All right, let's begin. So we left off with our last training just deciding that as applicants, we were going to apply to all four of these wonderful positions. Now, before we actually walk through that applicant process, I want to introduce exactly what HRCenter is and how you access it here in Enterprise. So you'll see that if you navigate to the All Options bar within your navigational tree, that in that big menu we have HRCenter. Just a reminder that any of the options that you see within the All Options menu can be added to your main navigational tree here. And because we're going to be using HRCenter quite a bit over the rest of our trainings here, why don't we go ahead and add HRCenter to our navigational tree? So to do that, we're going to hop into that Options menu within our E button, and I'm going to move to this navigation section. Okay, so we have our default out-of-the-box groups here, and you'll see that it's not going to let me select and add new groups. But to create a group and actually include HRCenter, I just have to add my own custom group. Now, when I make this group, it's only visible to me. So if every user wants HRCenter included in their navigational tree, they are all going to need to come into this navigation section and actually add that group. So I'm just going to deselect all of the items that I don't need and leave the ones that I do need. Okay, great. So I'm done making my selection, and when we go ahead and save, we'll now see that HRCenter is listed in my tree. So we'll go ahead and select HRCenter, and that takes me to our HRCenter dashboard. If I had to describe HRCenter, I would describe it as a book. The book itself, the title of the book, everything that happens in that book, cover to cover, is what we would call a workflow in HRCenter. So all of these workflows, these are, if we imagine, all of the different books. If I select a workflow or a book here, we see that it's built up of these steps. Now again, thinking of it as a book, I kind of like to think of the steps as chapters. So there's chapter 1 that the employee would go to, which in this case is that basic application information. Here they would be filling out information like their name, their address, their work history, adding in a resume. When they finish that step, or that chapter, it's going to be up to you as service reps in Enterprise to review those applicants. So if we were to jump into that View Submitted category, what we would see is a list of all of our applicants or employees that completed that first chapter. Then it would be up to us to decide, is this somebody that we want to advance to the next step, to the next chapter? Should we allow them to give it another shot, unlock, and allow them to log back in and change any information? Or is this somebody that we can't work with? I could always right-click and reject the workflow. So our person never gets to chapter 2. They don't ever finish that book. If I decide that this is somebody we're going to be hiring and I want them to complete the I-9 and the W-4, when I continue them on to onboarding and advance them to our next step, then they've successfully been pushed to chapter 2. So it's now up to them to log back into HRCenter and finish that chapter. Now, once they're done with all of those steps, they've completed the workflow. To bring this full circle here, each step is built from pages. We'll see this as we move throughout the workflow together. But in the first example I provided, step 1, where people fill out their work history and their education information, All of those pieces are different pages of the step. The I-9 is a page within phase 2. Another big word to keep in mind as we go throughout HR Center today is the word customizable. So many pieces of HR Center is customizable by you. The names of the workflows. You can name your book whatever you want. Same with the names of our chapters and pages. There's also no limit to the number of steps that you have in your workflow. You can have a 1-chapter book. Or for something like our direct hire workflow, it could be a little bit more complex and you could advance people through multiple steps. Today, we're going to walk through the basic application, which tends to be a pretty popular setup. Step 1, they fill out all of their basic application information, something you would fill out in a standard online application. And step 2, they fill out all of that pre-employment paperwork, things like the I-9 and the W-4. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So on our main page here, I have 2 different options. I could log in with an existing username and password, or I could register as a new user. Now, if I was somebody that had been advanced to a new step, then when I went back to your website, I would be logging in with my existing username and password. However, if I'm beginning a brand new book and I've never worked with you before, then I would have to register as a new user. So let's go ahead and do that. Here, I'll pick a branch that I want to apply to. In this case, it's all of those branches within my fake company, High Tech Staffing. And then I'm going to choose the application that I want to apply to. Now notice we're seeing a different list of options here versus what we see in Enterprise. And the reason these 2 drop-downs are different, the reason we have more options in this drop-down, is because one of the things that you get to customize is whether or not you want a workflow to be web public. Is this something that any applicant should be able to just apply to? Or are some applications invite only? Meaning the only way that somebody can complete the workflow AJ application demo is by receiving an emailed invitation with a direct link. So this could be great if you have any really detailed or client-specific workflows that you would want somebody to go through. We'll grab the basic application workflow and click Next. Let's go ahead and give our person a username and a password. Now here, we're asking for the email address and the social security number. Now this is very important because when our applicant here, Kayleen Jackson, submits to begin the application, what Enterprise is going to do is look in the system and see if we already have any employee records that have this email address or this social security number on file. If it finds a match, it's going to prevent this person from registering as a new applicant. So for example purposes here, I know that this social is already in the system, and when I begin that application, we're getting a warning that our records indicate we already have the application in the system. So this is going to be a way of preventing duplicates from getting into your database. Finally, last note I'll make on this is, remember, our word is customizable. You don't have to validate against the email address and the social security number. You could do one or the other. Maybe you just want to check against emails or just SSNs. Everything we see here, the name of the step itself, the intro text, the pages that we see, the order in which they appear, all of that is, you guessed it, customizable. So when we go throughout this demo application, if you're seeing fields that you don't necessarily agree with or fields that we require that you wouldn't require, that's great, because the beauty of HR Center is you get to decide what questions you want to ask and whether or not you want to make those questions required. Something else I want to point out here is as soon as an employee successfully registers, that is what creates the employee record. So I haven't actually filled out any information yet, but you'll see if we run an employee search for Kayleen Jackson, we already have an employee record for her in the system. It's a little bit of a blank employee record. We don't have a whole lot of information, but it's there. You'll also see if we go to the details section and the candidacy page, Kayleen has been added as a web candidate onto 4 separate positions. These are the 4 orders that Kayleen had favorited and applied to from our job board. So when people do add themselves to a job, they're really adding themselves as a W candidate or a web candidate. From here, I could right click, and from here, when we go to the candidate section, we can see that Kayleen Jackson has been added as a web candidate. Now, I certainly don't expect you to be constantly looking at individual employee and order records to determine who's applied to a job. Let's use an employee search to do that. So if I run an employee search here, let's clear our criteria out. In that enhanced search, we have an order candidate category. So from here, what I would do is set up a saved search to say, I want to see everybody that's been added as a web candidate and maybe in the past month. So I want to see people that have been added as a web candidate since 4/17/2017 and show me in the results when they were added as a web candidate. So we have 11 people in our search results, including our Kayleen Jackson. By default, I'll also point out that when users do apply to a position online, that message is being logged on their employee record showing that they've been added as a web candidate. And from here, I could always right click and jump directly to that order record, where we also see that message logged. So it looks like both Laura Turner and Chris Breeze have applied to this position. We're seeing it a little bit differently on Kayleen Jackson's record, only because we configure our demo database differently all the time. Let's go back to the application and continue filling out that information. In our pre-screening question, these can be questions that prevent a user from getting any farther. So if I fail to answer any of these questions correctly, it could reject my application automatically and say, thanks, we've received everything we need to from you. For today's example, why don't we do our best to answer these correctly? I'll go ahead and select Save and Continue, and that will kick me into the next step. Here, HRCenter is asking for a copy of my resume. Now, if I do upload a resume, a couple of benefits are going to happen. One, it's going to act just like the resume parser, and it's going to take all of that information from my resume and parse it into the related fields of the online application. Another bonus is it's going to save that resume as a document on my employee record. For today, I'll continue without. And here's really your first chance to see what all of those required fields look like. A perfect example of a field that in reality I wouldn't make required is this address too. You know, that's great for things like apartment numbers, but what if somebody doesn't have an address to line? And we can just use that tab key to move throughout the fields, and we'll save and continue. Perfect. Let's go ahead and add in our phone info. And in this phone type, users have the ability to role themselves in texting. If you've used Enterprise before, you know that our ability to text out of the system is driven by that contact method, SMS email. If I choose to say that my phone type is voice and text, then I select my cell carrier. Let's say it's T-Mobile. and that, yes, I would like to receive texts about jobs. When I click to save and continue, what we'll see on our employee record in Enterprise, when we refresh this page here, is that Kayleen now has 4 contact methods: a cell phone, an email address, a regular phone, and an SMS email. So that's now been added for me, so I could really easily send her that text message without having to manually add that in. The skills that we see here should look a little bit familiar. These are interest codes. Now, what we're seeing in this first step are the interest code categories. So in Enterprise, we see these listed in this initial category dropdown. So if I were to select the customer service category, we have a handful of interest codes that belong to that bucket or that group. In HRCenter, if I select the customer service category and then save and continue, I then am picking and choosing which of those skills within that bucket I have. So we can do years and months, or just years, just months, or nothing at all. Here, we'll go ahead and add our work history. In this case, we can also see that one of the things we get to customize with HRCenter are our minimums and maximums. So we're saying we have to enter at least one, but also we can't enter more than one. So you can make whatever sort of minimums and maximums that you want. In my case, the only pieces of information that we are requiring are the employer and the position, but again, you'd be able to require any of this information. So we'll save and continue. And in this next spot, my step review section here, there's not a lot for me to really do, but it is a very, very important step. This is me on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire submitting my final answer. So once we select submit, we are locking everything in. And as an applicant, I won't have the ability to change any of that information anymore. You'll see if we go back to the contact info page, I can see everything I entered in, but I can't change any of that information. Now, hold on, no need to panic. If somebody does get a new phone number or a new email address, you can always give them access or the ability to add that new information or change information online through HRCenter. So back in Enterprise here, if we refresh Kayleen's record, we now have all of those interest codes added. And in our details area, we've got the address. We see that the WASH status comes in as a web applicant. So that could be another searching tool that you utilize, is that WASH status. In our past job section, we see our job at Sasquatch Steel. Now let's fast forward a week and suppose that Kayleen gets a job offer through us, and we're now ready for her to complete step 2 or chapter 2 in our book, the onboarding. So we're ready for her to complete that pre-employment paperwork. Now you saw from HRCenter we can advance an applicant to the next step. We can also do that right from their employee record. If I move into that integrations page and HRCenter, here I have the same button. I have the same ability to advance somebody to a next step or to unlock their workflow. When we select to unlock a workflow, it's opening that back up. So these fields wouldn't be grayed out anymore. They'd be able to recomplete that information and send it through again. Let's go ahead and advance Kayleen to that next step. Now, every time that an applicant is advanced to a next step, or every time there's something new that's available for them to complete through HRCenter, they receive an email notification. So you don't have to manually send those out. Let's go ahead, and for fun, why don't we log back in? So I'm going to log off as Kayleen, And when I would go back to complete that second step, this is where I would now be logging in with my username and password. Notice that if somebody forgets their username or forgets their password, we have a retrieval process that's very similar to pretty much any online service you use where you have a username and password. But then also from Enterprise, you always have the ability to manually reset that employee's information. First of all, what's kind of nice is right from this HR Center page, we can see our person's username, so we can at least remind them of that. And from the web user account page, you'll always have the ability to reset that person's password. Let's go ahead and continue on as Kayleen, this time completing the onboarding. And we'll continue. So here it's showing me that we've completed the application step of our basic application workflow, and now I've been assigned to complete onboarding. Just like in our previous step, everything we see here, our intro text, what we call it, it's all customizable. Now the I-9 is going to require a lot of work from me as an applicant. Applicants do have to key in all of this information, and it's going to be important that you screen it. So we want to make sure that Kayleen enters in this information correctly. The Department of Homeland Security is pretty strict about that. So I'm partial to using that tab key to really easily move throughout these, but every applicant's going to be different. And let's say I did not use a preparer translator. Before I continue on, just to put everyone at ease, what's really nice is whenever there are updates to the I-9, something changes, there's a new version, for instance, we've got an expiration date here, we'll automatically update and provide those updates to you, so you're never going to have to go in and change the version of the I-9 that we're supplying you. We handle all of that for you and automatically push out those updates to make sure that you are up to code. We'll continue on. This next page, the employer portion, is something that you as a service rep are going to be completing in Enterprise. So when they come in to your office with their supporting documents for the I-9, you'll be reviewing those documents with them from Enterprise. We'll be taking a look at that in our next session. We save and continue again. This page here is again displayed for reference. Nothing needs to be filled out, but that Department of Homeland Security wants to make sure we're showing it. And here we'll go ahead and enter in our signature. This is legally binding in all 50 states. We're going to see that our W-4 is a little bit faster to fill out. Unlike the I-9, we can have Enterprise take information from the employee record, like the name and the address and the social, and pre-fill it into this field for us. So all our employee has to worry about is entering in the correct allowances. Another neat thing here for field 5 and field 7, if I put in 2, that's my total number of allowances, the system is not going to allow myself to write in exempt. Or if I do write in exempt, it's not going to allow me to enter in 2 allowances. So it'll let me do one or the other, but not both. If somebody does write in exempt here, that's going to come into Enterprise as 99 exemptions. We'll again save and continue. Sign our name. And then we'll find ourselves back at that step review page. So once again, here we are submitting our final answer. As soon as I submit this, I can review and see the information that I filled out, but there's no ability for me to go back and change any of that information now. These are strictly read-only fields. So it would be up to you as a service rep to give me access to change that information. When we hop back into Enterprise here, we're going to see a couple of things. One, in the pay setup area of the employee record, the exemptions and tax status have all been filled out for me. So that's pulling the information from the W-4 and keying it in. We're also seeing in the documents area that Kayleen has a W-4 on file. So when we double click to view that, there's that W-4 with all of that wonderful information entered on in there. Finally, in the integrations and HRCenter section, if we select to review the onboarding, here's the I-9, which is up to us as a service rep to review and sign. When we complete our employer portion, it's then added to the employee record as a document. And that's something we'll be covering in our next session. So this wraps up everything we had for this training. Please complete the related quiz before moving on to the next session. Thank you.